You ever think you're moving into a quiet neighborhood? A place where you can finally relax after years of working long shifts, only to realize you've stepped into the middle of a circus you didn't sign up for. That was me. I thought this cul-de-sac would be peaceful, just me, my driveway, and my weekends finally free of stress. I never imagined that a petty $79 fine would trigger a battle between me and a group of self-appointed HOA cops who thought they ran the world. What they didn't know was, had the one card they could never be tied worked for the city's parking authority. The first time I got a notice from the HOA, I laughed. It was a letter claiming I owed them $79 for improper trash bin storage. According to their standards, my bins weren't tucked back against the fence at the exact angle they demanded. $79 for that. I crumpled up the paper and tossed it into the very bin they were complaining about. I figured that would be the end of it. But I underestimated them. See, this HOA wasn't like the usual ones you hear about sending letters and slapping fines on homeowners. No, these people had their own little army. They wore reflective vests, carried clipboards, and even walked around with radios like they were on some kind of patrol shift. The neighborhood kids started calling them the HOA cops, and honestly, it fit too well. They strutted down the street like they were in charge of law enforcement, except their jurisdiction was nothing more than mailboxes, lawns, and paint. Shades, I ignored that first fine because to me it was laughable. But ignoring them was the worst thing I could have done. These people thrived on control, and when someone didn't bow to their rules, they took it personally. The next morning, I woke up to find a neon orange sticker plastered on my mailbox. It read, "Second notice. Pay fine immediately." And taped underneath it was a warning that my continued noncompliance would result in further action. I shook my head. It was $79, not unpaid property taxes. But what happened a few days later made me realize they weren't just bluffing. That Saturday, I had plans. My cousin was coming over to watch the game, and I was already prepping the grill in the backyard. I walked out front to grab something from my truck and froze. There were two cars parked across my driveway, blocking me in completely. Both belonged to HOA board members. Standing next to them were three people in neon vests, arms crossed, clipboards in hand, smirking like they'd just pulled off some brilliant operation. "Sir, you've ignored multiple notices," one of them said like he was reading from a police script. "Until you pay your outstanding fine, your driveway access will remain restricted." I couldn't help but laugh. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. But they weren't. They actually thought they could enforce this. Nonsense. I looked around and saw neighbors peeking through blinds, watching. The HOA cops had staged a scene trying to make an example out of me. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I dealt with situations like this every single day. Just on a much bigger scale. I worked for the city's parking authority. My job: writing citations, enforcing parking laws, coordinating with tow trucks. These clowns thought they were blocking my driveway to prove a point, but in reality, they had just handed me the easiest case of my life. And right then, as I stood there in front of my blocked driveway, I decided I wasn't going to just pay "That's fine" to make them go away. No, this was going to be the start of a lesson they would never forget. I stood there, staring at those two cars blocking my driveway, and for a moment, I just let the scene sink in. The HOA cops were puffing out their chests, acting like they had just won some grand battle. One of them even had the nerve to wave a clipboard at me like it was a badge. My cousin pulled up just then and had to park down the street, confused, asking, "Why can't I pull in?" I just shook my head, holding back a laugh, because as ridiculous as this was, I already knew how I was going to handle it. "Gentlemen," I said, trying not to grin, "you're aware that what you're doing right now is illegal, right?" They smirked. We're enforcing HOA rules. You ignored our notices. We're within our rights. I tilted my head. Your rights don't extend to city streets, and you don't get to block someone's private driveway. One of them laughed. Call the cops if you want. Good luck. By the time they show up, you'll have to pay the fine anyway. They thought they had me trapped, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't bother arguing further. Instead, I pulled out my phone, turned on the camera, and started recording. I zoomed in on their cars, their license plates, their smug faces. They immediately got defensive. What are you recording for? One snapped. For evidence, I replied, you'll see soon enough. I went back inside, my cousin following me, asking what the hell was going on. I explained the HOA's game, and he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. Man, they really don't know what you do for a living, do they? Nope, I said, grinning. And I'm not about to tell them just yet. Let's just say, they just picked the wrong guy to play this game with. The next morning, I went into work like usual. My office at the parking authority isn't glamorous gray walls, rows of computers, and stacks of citation logs, but it's where the city's parking enforcement runs. I pulled the footage off my phone and filed an incident report through official channels. See, the beauty of my job is that I don't have to argue with people. I don't have to beg cops to show up. I know the codes, the laws, and the procedures by heart. And blocking a private driveway, that's a ticketable offense. Doesn't matter if you're a resident, an HOA board member, or the mayor himself. The law's the law by the time I clocked out that day. I already had authorization to start writing tickets in my own neighborhood. I kept it quiet, didn't say a word to anyone. I wanted the HOA cops to think they had me cornered, that I was ignoring their threats. But really, I was setting them up. That Friday evening, like clockwork, they came strutting down the street. Again, same neon vests, same smug looks, radios buzzing with pointless chatter. And wouldn't you know, two of their cars were parked half on the sidewalk, half blocking a fire hydrant. Classic violations. I walked over calmly, pulled out my ticket pad, and started writing. At first, they didn't notice. But when I bent down to slide a bright yellow citation under the windshield wiper of the first car, one of them snapped around. What? The hell do you think you're doing? I smiled, handed him a copy of the ticket, and said, just doing my job. The color drained from his face. Your job? What do you mean your job? I didn't answer. I just kept writing the second ticket, methodical.com, while neighbors started stepping outside to watch. A small crowd formed. People whispered, is he ticketing the HOA board? Someone even pulled out their phone to record. The HOA cops were fuming. One of them tried to block me, but I pointed to the badge clipped on my belt, the official parking authority insignia. Suddenly, their bravado cracked. They hadn't expected this. They thought they were untouchable. I finished my work, handed over the copies, and said, blocking driveways. Illegal. Parking on sidewalks. Illegal. Blocking hydrants. Definitely illegal. You want to enforce rules? Better start with yourselves. The neighbors clapped. Actual applause. And for the first time, I saw the HOA cops look nervous instead of smug. But this was just the beginning. Because I knew once their cars started racking up tickets, they'd try to fight back harder, and that was fine by me. I had more than tickets up my sleeve, had the power to tow. The fallout from those first tickets came faster than I expected. The very next morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, and there it was, thick white envelope taped to my front door, stamped in red, final notice. Inside was a typed letter from the HOA board, claiming I was in violation of community cooperation standards and that I now owed hundreds of dollars in additional fines. They even threatened further restrictions if I didn't comply. I laughed out loud. Cooperation standards. What did that even mean? They were making up rules on the fly just to punish me for daring to push back. But here's the thing, everything they wrote in that letter was worthless. HOA rules stop at the edge of public property. And the moment they blocked my driveway, the moment they parked illegally on city streets, they stepped right into my jurisdiction. Later that afternoon, I noticed something new. A black SUV slowly rolling past my house. Inside were two of the HOA board members scribbling on clipboards. They were actually trying to patrol me, as if I was some criminal they needed to catch. It was laughable, but I played along. I waved at them. They didn't wave back. That night, I called my contact at the parking authority and filed a second report. This time, including the video of them blocking my driveway and the photos of their cars parked illegally. The response was swift. Next, violation, authorized tow. That phrase stuck in my head like music. Authorized tow. It didn't take long. By the weekend, the HOA cops were back in full force, strutting through the neighborhood like wannabe deputies. Two of them parked in front of a fire lane while they went door to door delivering notices. It was almost too easy. I grabbed my ticket, pad, and my radio. Within minutes, I had slapped citations on both vehicles. Then I made the call. The tow truck arrived quicker than I expected, rumbling down the street with flashing lights. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some stepping onto porches, whispering excitedly. They could smell drama brewing. When the first car got hooked up, one of the HOA board members came sprinting out, red-faced and furious. "You can't do this," he shouted. I held up my badge calmly. "Actually, I can. You're in violation of city parking law." "This is HOA business," he barked. "No," I said, pointing to the fire lane markings on the curb. "This is city business. And right now, the city says your car is getting towed." The crowd loved it. A couple of neighbors even cheered as the truck pulled the car up onto the flatbed. The HOA board member screamed into his phone, probably calling the rest of his little squad, but it was too late. His car was gone, headed straight for impound. The second one tried to stand in front of his vehicle, arms spread wide, shouting, "I won't let you take it." The tow truck driver, a big guy with forearms like tree trunks, just looked at me and said, "You want me to move him?" I smirked. "No need. Just keep rolling." The driver inched forward, and suddenly, Mr. HOA hero dove out of the way like his life depended on it. Seconds later, his car was chained and lifted, the metal groaning as the truck pulled away. The look on his face, pure humiliation. The neighbors were recording, laughing, even clapping. The HOA cops weren't the bullies anymore. They were the joke of the block as the trucks disappeared down the street. I turned to the growing crowd of neighbors and said loudly, "If they try to block your driveway, call me. If they park illegally, let me know. They want to enforce rules well, so can I." That night, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages from neighbors thanking me, even sending pictures of HOA board cars parked where they shouldn't be. I'd gone from the guy the HOA tried to make an example of, to the guy everyone trusted to keep them in check. But I knew this wasn't the end. People like the HOA cops don't go down quietly. They were embarrassed, angry, and desperate to regain control. And sure enough, the very next week, they tried something bold, something that would drag the entire neighborhood into the fight. The week after the tow truck fiasco, things in the neighborhood felt different. Neighbors waved at me more often. Some even stopped me during my morning jog just to thank me for finally putting those HOA cops in their place. But not everyone was happy. The HOA board had been humiliated in front of the entire street, and people like them don't forget humiliation. They stew in it. They plot. And then they lash out. I didn't have to wait long to see how they'd retaliate. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find not one, but 3 letters, each stamped with the HOA's official letterhead. The first one accused me of disturbing community peace by harassing board members. The second demanded that I appear at a disciplinary hearing for public misconduct. And the third, the boldest of all, threatened legal action if I didn't cease and desist from unauthorized ticketing. I laughed so hard I almost dropped the letters right there on the lawn. Unauthorized ticketing. They really thought they could scare me with lawyer talk when I had the full backing of the city behind me. It was pathetic. But that wasn't all. That afternoon, I noticed something strange. Flyers taped to stop signs, community boards, and even some mailboxes. The flyers had my picture on them snapped from one of those neighborhood events with big block letters across the top, "Beware. Aggressive neighbor abusing power." My jaw actually dropped. They were trying to smear me like some kind of cues. I am a kind of smear me like some kind of neighborhood villain. The flyer accused me of targeting residents unfairly, of bringing city politics into the community, and of endangering neighborhood harmony. I pulled one down and showed it to my cousin. He just shook his head. "They're desperate, man. You hit them where it hurts, and now they're throwing mud, hoping it sticks." I knew what I had to do. These people wanted a public battle. Fine, I'd give them one. But I wasn't going to fight them on their terms. I was going to use the one weapon they couldn't stop: exposure. So I reached out to a contact I knew. At the local news station, she'd covered parking disputes before, and this one was too juicy to pass up. I sent her the videos, the photos, the flyers, everything. Within 2 days, a news van was parked right in front of my house. Cameras rolled, microphones came out, and I told my story, every ridiculous detail. From the $17.9 fine to the driveway blockade, to the tow trucks hauling away their precious cars. The segment aired that evening, and it spread like wildfire. The headline alone was brutal. HOA blocks resident's driveway over. $79 fine to know he's a parking authority officer. The video of the tow trucks got replayed again and again. Neighbors who had stayed quiet suddenly started speaking up in the comments, sharing their own stories about being bullied and fined by the HOA. It wasn't just me anymore, it was the whole neighborhood rising up. The next HOA meeting was chaos. I didn't even have to go, I could hear it from my porch. Voices shouting, doors slamming, neighbors arguing with board members. The smear campaign had backfired. People weren't buying the flyers. They were furious at the board for dragging the whole community into their petty war. Later that week, I got another letter from the HOA. This one wasn't threatening or smug. It was desperate. They accused me of inciting division and warned that if I didn't stop, they would seek outside legal counsel. But here's the part they didn't understand. They weren't the ones holding power anymore. They'd lost control of the narrative. They weren't feared. They were mocked. Every move they made only dug them deeper. And me, I wasn't done yet. Because if they wanted to keep escalating, I was ready to go all the way. I had the law, the city, and now the public on my side. The HOA had tried to block me in, but what they didn't realize was I had just cornered them. The HOA board must have thought they were making their final stand when they called in the police. One Saturday morning, woke up to the sound of heavy knocking on my front door. When I opened it, 2 officers stood there, and right behind them, smirking, as if they'd already won, were 3 HOA board members in their neon vests. "Sir," one officer began, "we've had a complaint from your Homeowners Association that you've been harassing them and exceeding your authority." I almost laughed. Exceeding my authority. Officers, with all due respect, I am the authority when it comes to parking and public rights-of-way in this city. I pulled out my badge and ID, handing them over. The smirks on the HOA members' faces vanished instantly. The officer glanced down at the badge, then back up at me. "You work for the parking authority." "Yes, sir," I said calmly. "And these fine folks have been blocking driveways, parking in fire lanes, and obstructing hydrants. I've documented every violation and filed it through proper city channels. What they're calling harassment. It's just me doing my job." The cops looked from me to the HOA board, and one of them sighed. "This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. We're not here to enforce HOA rules." Then he turned to the board members. "But blocking driveways and parking illegally, that's absolutely our business. You might want to reconsider how you're handling things." The HOA cops sputtered and protested, but the officers didn't want to hear it. They left without writing me up for anything. In fact, one of them even shook my hand before walking back to his car. That was the moment the HOA knew they were finished. They couldn't twist the law anymore. They couldn't hide behind intimidation, and they definitely couldn't bully me with their fake authority. But I wasn't done. I wanted to end this once and for all, not just for me, but for every neighbor. They'd harassed, so I put in a formal request for a citywide enforcement sweep in our neighborhood. It wasn't hard between the news coverage, the documented complaints from residents, and the videos I collected. The city had more than enough reason to approve it. The following week, the sweep began. It was like a parade of justice rolling down our streets. Parking authority vehicles, tow trucks, even inspectors. Every violation was nailed. Cars belonging to HOA board members lined up illegally. Ticketed, driveways blocked by their so-called enforcers. Towed, sidewalks cluttered with their junk. Cleared the best part. It all happened in broad daylight with the whole neighborhood watching. One by one, the HOA board's cars were hauled away, bright yellow tickets flapping under the wipers. Neighbors stood on their lawns, clapping, recording, and laughing. Some even shouted things like, "How's it feel now?" And guess the rules apply to you too. The humiliation was complete. Within a month, 3 of the board members had resigned. The HOA's reputation was in shambles, and the residents, empowered and emboldened, demanded reform. For the first time, people weren't afraid to stand up to the so-called HOA cops. And me. I never paid that $17.9 fine, because it was never about the money. It was about principle. They tried to make an example out of me, and instead they became the example of what happens when petty power goes too far. OUTRO narrator's reflection. Funny thing is, all of this started with a $79 fine. $79. That's all it took for the HOA to dig their own grave. They thought they could bully me, block me in, shame me into submission. But what they didn't realize was that I had something they never did: the law on my side. In the end, their power. Trip cost them thousands in fines, tows, and legal fees. But more importantly, it cost them the respect of the community. Because power without respect, that's nothing. So if you've ever dealt with a petty HOA, remember this: sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting back on their level. Sometimes the best revenge is letting the truth, the law, and a little bit of patience do the work for you. And trust me, watching those tow trucks roll away with their cars was worth far more than $79. Funny thing is, all of this started with a $17 fine. $17. That's all it took for the HOA to dig their own grave. They thought they could bully me, block me in, shame me into submission. But what they didn't realize was that I had something they never did: the law on my side. In the end, their power trip cost them thousands in fines, tows, and legal fees. But more importantly, it cost them the respect of the community. Because power without respect, that's nothing. So if you've ever dealt with a petty HOA, remember this: sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting back on their level. Sometimes the best revenge is letting the truth, the law, and a little bit of patience do the work for you. And trust me, watching those tow trucks roll away with their cars was worth far more than $79.